Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily. I'm Nicholas Richardson and this is the news. 78 years ago today, the Warsaw Uprising broke out. It was the largest underground military operation in German-occupied Europe during the Second World War. For 63 days, the soldiers of the Home Army conducted a heroic and lonely fight, the goal of which was an independent Poland. From the morning, numerous ceremonies have been held in Warsaw, with the participation of state and city authorities, as well as surviving insurgents and residents. At 5 p.m. in Warsaw, the traditional alarm siren was sounded. This is a signal for the inhabitants of the capital to stop for a moment to pay silent tribute to the insurgents who, at W hour, began their unequal struggle with the occupying German forces.
Powstańcy warszawscy byli.
The Warsaw insurgents were the bravest soldiers in the history of the Polish nation. Soldiers who preserved the value of freedom, who fought fearlessly to the very end.
Przechowali wartość wolności.
Today's anniversary celebrations take place in the capital from morning. Wreaths were laid in Warsaw's Wola district and candles were lit to commemorate the civilian victims of the uprising. 78 years ago, there was a planned extermination of the inhabitants of the capital, people who lived here in the immediate vicinity. It is difficult to imagine today, but these monuments scattered here among the nearest streets in this district of today's Wola mark the places of the murdered, but in fact, in some sense, also the burial of thousands of Warsaw residents. Before noon, President Duda opened the exhibition Warsaw Mariupol, City of Ruins, City of Struggle, City of Hope. When the fighting took place here, and when the German occupier was ruthlessly murdering Polish civilians of the capital, and unfortunately, Russian aggression against Ukraine is similarly ruthless today. Both German totalitarianism and contemporary Russian imperialism are the same evil, which in the name of sick ideologies goes as far as genocide, extermination and exceptional barbarism. The Warsaw Uprising was another installment in the fight between good and evil. Led by Poles, the free world lacked courage. There was insufficient aid given to the fighting Warsaw.
Zabrakło wystarczającej pomocy udzielonej walczącej Warszawie.
The Minister of Culture, Piotr Gliński, commemorated the 63 employees of Elektrownia Powiśla who managed to take control of the plant. This allowed the maintenance of electricity supplies to the fighting Warsaw. Without memory and identity, without this kind of community thinking about the professional group of power engineers, who were also able to defend Poland with a gun in their hand, there will probably not be any of your professional successes. And so our security, the security of the Polish national community, would certainly be weakened. After W hour, members of the Gazeta Polska Club sang uprising songs at the Powązki Cemetery as every year. However, after 5 p.m, the ceremonial march of the uprising started along the streets of Warsaw. The organisation of this year's march left something to be desired because of the resistance from the capital's authorities. This is a tribute to all those who died 78 years ago during the Warsaw Uprising, who fought for an independent Poland. It is also a certain historical lesson, a history lesson for all of us, and what dangers await us and what we may have to face in the future. Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki laid flowers at the Warsaw Insurgents Cemetery in front of the fallen, undefeated monument. And at 8:30 p.m. on Pilsudski Square, everyone was able to take part, actively or passively, in the concert Unforbidden Songs, which was broadcast on television. On the 1st of August 1944, the Home Army commander, General Tadeusz Komorowski, gave an order to begin the Warsaw Uprising. The insurgents wanted to liberate Warsaw from occupation by the Nazi army before the arrival of the Soviets, in order to ensure Poland's sovereignty after the war. Unfortunately, the clash with the very well-armed German army proved to be beyond their strength. The Germans were losing the war. The Soviets were approaching Warsaw, and the Western Allies liberated French territory. After almost 5 years of German occupation, the hope of a quick regaining of freedom was revived in Polish hearts. For 5 years, an army that had been prepared, demanding retaliation, in a situation where panic was seen among the Germans, could have taken uncoordinated actions on its own. The uprising would certainly have broken out anyway, because that was the mood in Warsaw.
I powstanie tak czy inaczej z pewnością by wybuchło, bo takie były nastroje w Warszawie.
The decision to start the Warsaw Uprising was made by the Commander-in-Chief of the Home Army, General Tadeusz Komorowski. The purpose of the uprising was clear: independent liberation of the capital, which was to be a bargaining chip in post-war negotiations that would save Poland from Soviet occupation. We hoped that on the one hand there would be a strike by the Red Army, and on the other hand, the Home Army would step forward and liberate the city, take over and act here as Poland's legal, constitutional authority. The Warsaw Uprising was the most important element of Operation Storm, organised by the Home Army. The Warsaw Uprising is not the only uprising. The fact is that the Warsaw Uprising was the biggest battle of the Uprising of 1944. In fact, we had an uprising in 1944 that started many months earlier, in Volhynia. After initial successes, one of the symbols of which was the capture of the Past building, German forces began to force the insurgents out of their positions. The Germans captured more districts. They took Ochota in 4 days or so. In Mokotów, however, these troops concentrated, defended, but Mokotów was separated from the city centre. There was not only one city centre, as it was divided into north and south. The Germans had a decisive advantage in armaments. Polish volunteers stood before a well-trained army such as the Wehrmacht, which was supported by criminals and murderers. Despite this, the insurgents fought bravely until the very end. At first there were very few weapons, but after a few days, as a result of the fact that several colleagues fell who were armed, I received a weapon, such a long machine gun, which was called Lightning. It was of our manufacture, that is, of underground production, and then they replaced my Lightning machine gun with a carabine. In reaction to the uprising, the Germans completely destroyed Warsaw. The German plunder was carried out on an unprecedented scale. There were specialized branches whose aim was to remove Polish cultural goods.
Warszawa została obrabowana.
Warsaw was robbed of literally everything. Even what was more valuable, marble and polished granite, were put on trains. I suspect that somewhere in Germany there are records to this day of what was exported. Poles know the bloody history of the Warsaw Uprising. However, in the West, often the only thing that is remembered is the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising.
Być może dojdziemy
Perhaps it
do
will come to
tego,
the point where the
że
uprising will
powstanie
also be
będzie
appreciated in common history
także
as the greatest uprising of the
dowartościowane
underground army under German
w
occupation. The uprising collapsed on the 2nd of October 1944 after 63 days of fighting alone. 50,000 insurgents took part in it, of whom 10,000 were killed and over 20,000 wounded. As a result of German crimes, approximately 200,000 civilians were killed. After the capitulation of Warsaw, the Germans deported several 100,000 people to a transit camp in Pruszków. In the following weeks, the capital of Poland was razed to the ground. The armed forces of Ukraine took control of 46 towns in the north of the Kherson Oblast. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs reported that the Polish Foreign Minister, Zbigniew Rau, spoke today with the Turkish Foreign Minister, Mevlut Cavusoglu, about the agreement unlocking grain exports from Ukraine.
During the last 24 hours, cities such as Kharkiv, Nikopol, and Marganets came under fire. The largest attacks are still being made on Mykolaiv, where residential buildings, an outpatient clinic, and another storehouse of medicine and food have been destroyed. Currently, the Russian army is trying to strengthen its positions in the southern occupied territories of our country. Part of the Russian forces are moved from their positions in the east to the south, to the Kherson and Zaporizhia Oblasts. Ukrainian forces will respond to any strike. Despite the difficult situation, many inhabitants of Mykolaiv remain in the city. In spite of everything, the inhabitants of Mykolaiv do not leave the city in crowds. For now, they can decide about it themselves. We encourage them to leave, but we do not order them to yet. We are secure in terms of food supplies and humanitarian aid. We also get medicine and cleaning products. We accept everything, distribute it, and give it away. However, we have had a problem with drinking water for several months. We need means to disinfect it because the one we provide is not drinkable due to the damage to the water supply system. It is technical water. The armed forces of Ukraine took control of 46 localities in the Kherson region. In turn, tonight the Ukrainian army fired HIMARS launchers at 40 Russian railway cars in Brylivka, near Kherson. It arrived with soldiers and equipment from the occupied Crimea. About 80 Russian soldiers were killed and 200 were injured. Our intelligence and foreign sources confirmed that we hit the Russian train. Due to the fact that ammunition and other weapons were stored there, the explosion was quite powerful. This train transported technical reinforcements and the personnel of the Russian army. Such actions are deliberate because in this way we undermine the morale of Russian soldiers and break the supply chains. Contrary to earlier announcements, the first ship with corn to be delivered to Lebanon left the port of Odessa today.
Because of tension on the border between Kosovo and Serbia, the government in Pristina has postponed for a month the implementation of its plan to require ethnic Serbs living in northern Kosovo to replace Serbian car license plates with Kosovo ones within 60 days. Josep Borrell, the European Union Foreign Affairs representative, welcomed this decision.
We are seeing less and less willingness to listen to our requests, and my request to everyone today is to preserve peace at almost any cost. Once again, I ask the Albanians to come to their senses. I ask the Serbs not to fall for provocation and not to do anything that could lead to any conflict. But I also ask the representatives of the powerful and large countries that have recognized Kosovo's independence not to allow their protégés to cause conflict. I promise that we will seek peace, but let me tell you right away, there will be no capitulation and Serbia will prevail. If they dare to persecute Serbs, abuse Serbs, kill Serbs, Serbia will win. That's all I have to say. Measures aimed at equalizing relations between Serbia and Kosovo are not directed against anyone, but are intended to improve the situation of all citizens of the country, irrespective of their ethnicity. Therefore, I call on Serbian citizens of Kosovo not to succumb to the influence of Belgrade propaganda. The anger of Kosovo Serbs was sparked by Prishtina's recent decision to replace Serbian license plates with Kosovo ones. Kosovo authorities also intended to introduce additional border crossing formalities from today. On Sunday, Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić publicly called the Kosovo's government's movements a drive to expel Serbs. In turn, Kosovo President Vjosa Osmani appealed to Kosovo Serbs not to succumb to Belgrade's propaganda. 14 years after Kosovo declared independence, around 50,000 Serbs living in the north of Kosovo use license plates and documents issued by Serbian authorities, refusing to recognize Kosovo's state documents.
That's the news. Thank you for watching. Stay with us for the weather, Poland Daily Business, and more programmes. But from me, have a good night and a better tomorrow.